Coming up on episode 202 of Creative Writing, I'm sharing takeaways going from $100 a month to $26,000 a month as an author.
I can't go back to sleep, it's almost light. These restless thoughts have kept me up again tonight.
Hello and welcome to Creative Writing. This is the podcast for you, an author who wants to sell more books without being smarmy. And I'm your host, Kirsten Oliphant. I am so thankful that you are here, whether it is your first or 202nd time listening to the podcast. It's great to have you here, and I'm really excited about today's topic. Honestly, I'm excited just that I even have this topic to talk about, that, we're talking about my author journey. 3 years ago, I started in 2018 in March, made $115, and in February of this year, 2021, walked away with $26,000 in royalties. So I'm going to discuss not the nitty gritty stuff, but a lot of takeaways that I have, and I will get to some nitty gritty. I'm also going to do a paid training on the actual nitty gritty where I'm pulling out numbers and things like that, which you can sign up for if you go to creativewriting.com/deep dive or learn more about it. The reason that I'm breaking it up into some free and paid, well, a couple reasons actually. I love the podcast. I love offering free content, and I offer a lot of it. Sharing numbers and details makes me a little squirrely, especially because as my income has increased, anytime I'm transparent about that, it's interesting, the kinds of private messages you start receiving and the kind of, there's a blowback to it. So it's not always something, I like to be transparent, but there's a point at which I don't want to just spew all this. It also takes a lot of time. If you've ever been to my trainings, I have slides, I do Q&As. It's quite a bit of time, usually between an hour and 2 hours. So that will be a paid training. It's going to be affordable at $25. So you can come or not if you want to know more details, but you're going to get a lot today. And I'm going to talk specifically about the things that I did and maybe even some mistakes that I made as well. So if you want the show notes for this, you can go to creativewriting.com/202. And again, if you want to sign up for the more robust paid workshop, which is going to be live, I'm not sure of the date yet, but if you want to find out more, or buy the replay if you're listening later, you can go to creativewriting.com/deep dive. So let's dive in. As podcast hosts love to say, let's dive into talking about the things that I have learned and the takeaways. So just to kind of rewind, if you haven't been with me for long and you want to know kind of how this got started. So I published my first book, self-published my first book in March of 2018. It was called Cold Feet, Hot Summer. It is no longer available to buy. And this actually kind of became the brainchild I had starting in December of 2017. I had a devotional book I had published that was for Christmas, and I was using the tool Publisher Rocket, which I love, and was researching and kind of keywords and things I should put in for that book as I was trying to up the sales. It had been out, I think I published it in 2012 or 13, a long time ago. And so I was trying to look up some fresh keywords and get some eyeballs on that devotional. And I was finding that like the top Christmas terms were like Christmas romance and clean Christmas romance. And I was like, really? But Hallmark movies were just starting to become like the thing. They're not what they are today, but they were starting to become this big thing. And so I thought, I've learned all of this stuff about marketing. I haven't ever written romance. I have my MFA, so I was more of a literary writer. And that's what I had planned to come back to when I was trying to write novels. But I was like, I could do this, which I will say this about myself. I don't have a lot of fear and can jump into things, which is great, but I can also be way overconfident about things too. I dove into writing romance having never read a romance. I don't think I ever have. Goodness. Yeah, I have now, but I hadn't then, especially not clean romance. And so I did some market research. I knew enough. Again, I had been working in the online space, more in the entrepreneur and blogging world, but working with authors, doing nonfiction. Plus I had my background in fiction. But again, more of a literary kind of trad pub background. So I decided to do a little market research, looked at the clean and wholesome category, which was very different than what it is today. I looked at all the wrong books. Anyway, we'll get into some of the more mistakes I made. Made a lot of mistakes, but dove in with a short story at Christmas time, which made about no money, but what started to kind of build my name and brand and started to kind of figure things out. March, I put out my first book and made $115 in royalties, which I celebrated because I had a book out, a book published, and people were reading it. And by July of that year, I hit 4 figures a month. So I was making, I was trying to think that month, I think I made around 2,000 or 3,000. I'm going to kind of look it up here. Yeah, almost 4,000 actually. Or no, that's August. Okay, so July, I hit almost 2,000. And then by August, I hit 36. And that was, that was about my lowest after that was 2,000 ever a month. So from, a few months in, I was making 4 figures solidly. And then in the past fall, I started releasing romantic comedies. And in November of 2020, I hit my first 5-figure month, and they have continued to go up and kind of stay steady. This, I think last month February 2021 will probably beat this month because I had a new release out last month in February. But March, I should be breaking the 20,000 mark in a few days. So quite a bit of changes, and I'll have some graphics. So you definitely want to go look in the show notes if you can get to them, createifwriting.com/202 to kind of see the graph. And I'm going to talk about some of those things, more specifically the highs and lows in the deep dive training. But I want to talk about some of the takeaways because my goal when I did this, I thought to myself, I can do this. And I thought to myself as well, I know about platform building. I've been, working on this, watching this and doing it myself through blogging because after I got my MFA, we had a bunch of kids. I really couldn't write. And so I blogged. That was my creative outlet, but it became a financial outlet. And I did pretty well, made a couple thousand a month. Nothing amazing. I was not one of the giant bloggers, but, I had a bunch of traffic, some months, I'm trying to think, I feel like my biggest day ever, I think I had like 50,000 hits on one day. Like I had a post go viral, but I was somewhere between like 40,000 and 100,000 page views a month, which is not massive compared to friends I had who had millions, but it's a pretty big deal. So I learned a lot about platform building, and I thought I could apply all those things plus my writing skills and build what I like to call the Emma empire. And I joked about it, but I really wasn't joking, like because I wanted to build an empire. And here we are with, I'm still building it really, but I started writing under that pen name Emma St. Clair. So I want to talk about, that's just kind of the fast forward version. I think I've published over 20 books. I've also written under another pen name Sullivan Gray, which hasn't been a huge moneymaker, but has been so much fun and has made some money. It's not one I'm actively promoting or working on right now. I've written over 20 books, probably close to 30 if you include the other pen name. I've co-written books. I've been parts of series. I've hit the USA Today bestseller list twice, once with a nonfiction book under my name that I co-wrote with some other authors, and then with a box set of other clean romance authors this summer. Have had a lot of highs and lows. So I want to talk about what things, because really a lot of the things that I started doing back then are the things I'm still doing. Not a lot has changed. I have learned from some mistakes, but a lot of what I started out saying, this is what I'm going to do, this is the path, is still the path that I'm taking. So it's just been a slow and steady one. So the first thing, let's get into the specifics of this and my kind of takeaways of what I could impart to you from then to now. The first is don't do things that waste time. And this is really something that I started trimming the fat about really the first year. When I started Emma, because between December and March, I was a much slower writer then. My previous novels had taken over a year to write. I was writing deep, literary, kind of more dark novels, with, again, traditional publishing in mind. And so I was still figuring out, a couple months to write a novel was massive. I thought that was so fast. Now I'm more like a couple weeks to a month to write a novel and complete it. And by novel, mine are typically about 60,000 to 80,000 words. So I, was writing, but I was also doing this platform building stuff. I thought, okay, I'll do Pinterest. I'll have a Facebook, or I already had Pinterest actually. And so I had some platforms already, but most of them really didn't translate. So I had Pinterest, but that was under, I had a lot of mom stuff related to my blog. I started a new Twitter. I had almost 10,000 followers on Twitter under my name because I did, again, a lot of influencing and speaking about influencing and things like that. So I started a new Twitter. I started a Facebook page for Emma. and I started an email list. And very quickly, I realized I was not going to use Twitter at all. So I don't even know if that might have deleted the account. It's not really there. I started a blog and had all these plans of blogging, which I quickly abandoned. There is a website, which is more of a home base. There are a few blog posts. I've done some dabbling in content strategy, which I talk about. If you're curious about content strategy, that's in episode 200, which is really blogging and creating other content related. But I didn't use any of the platform I really had already built for this podcast. This podcast has been going on since 2015. I didn't use this platform. I had probably, 2,000 to 3,000, maybe more email subscribers. I've trimmed it way down to keep the most active subscribers. I think I'm around 3,000 or 4,000 now, but I didn't use that list. I didn't really use the platform I'd already built. It was totally from scratch because again, I wanted to see if the things I'd learned, if I could apply them. But I quickly stopped doing Twitter. I quickly realized that growing a Facebook page, other than ads, I didn't really care about the numbers of the Facebook page. So the main thing that I focused on is going to be the next one, which is email. And I'll talk about that more in a second. But I just want to say, I see a lot of authors doing a lot of things that waste time, starting a blog, and a lot of social media. And the reason that those can waste time, you can go back and listen to my most recent episodes about platform building, starting, I think, around episode 198 or 197. But the things that actually move the needles for sales, there's a couple things you want to do. I consider Author Platform connecting with your readers. So I want to build a relationship with my readers and I want to sell books. If you build a relationship with readers and write good books, you're more likely to get repeat buyers who don't need you to tell them about your books. They're looking for your books actively. So I wanted to write books good enough to hook those readers. I wanted to build a deeper relationship with them through email, so that they would continue to buy books. But I see authors doing things like Patreon, which can work, but is better if you already have an audience, because again, you're having to build an audience and you're not really capturing those emails on Patreon. You're building a whole other thing over there that takes the focus away from the book, or it can. I see authors worried about swag. I see them worried about blogging actively, being on Twitter and growing that Twitter following and doing all these things. I'm just now starting to use more social media. And I do think I'm finding Instagram to be helpful. And I may have an episode on that, but it is not moving the needle the way the main things do, which is email, list, and ads. And I didn't get into ads right away, but anything you can cut that is not going to directly build your relationship, and I mean really build it with your readers. Twitter is probably not that place. For most fiction authors, Twitter is probably not that place. Cut that time, cut the fat, and do things, focus on the things that will not waste your time. And then if you want to add things in later, you can. I do recommend sometimes, getting your name on some of these platforms so you have it. But again, ask yourself, because some of the things I'm saying don't do, maybe they are the thing. Maybe your blog is the thing that gets you attention. Maybe your YouTube channel is, but I do see a lot of authors creating the wrong kind of content. Again, go to episode 200 if you want to hear about the wrong kind of content, but don't waste your time doing that. So the things that don't waste time, and the main thing is to grow your email list. And I have been a huge email fan. I had a course on email that I no longer teach, but that was one of the first things I created way back when I started the podcast, because I feel very strongly about email. Grow your email list. That is one thing I did from the beginning. I now have, including my both pen names, I have over 10,000 subscribers between the pen names and so just the fiction list. And that had nothing to do with creative writing. I did not say, hey, join my list from my podcast listeners, who were interested in learning about how to be a writer. I did not do that. I didn't make it hard to find me, but I didn't pull from that. It was a totally, a list grown just for Emma. So this is really the foundation and the reason why studies have shown, Tim Grahl, if you follow him, who has a bunch of podcasts and great resources. He worked with bestsellers, from actually like the PR perspective and from, launching books. And that was what he found, is that email was more likely to sell like 3 times, like they did some experiments. It's also a great way to connect with your readers, because you can have them hit reply, and then that one-to-many communication becomes very intimate as you're going back and forth. Email has no algorithms. It's the only thing that you own. You can print out that list and move it to another spot or have those emails. It's just a totally different animal than something like Facebook, where your followers live there. And if Facebook changes or kicks you off Facebook, you've lost your followers. So it's very important. And that has been huge for me. And I still believe in it. And I'm still growing my list today. And there are lots of great resources. I will make a note to link to email resources in here. The next thing that was important to me and that I started doing right away was to build relationships with other authors, specifically in my genre. So even before I had enough email, people on my email list to really matter or move the needle, I was asking, hey, can I share your book in my email? I don't have anything for you to share yet, because a lot of authors do newsletter swaps. We trade back and forth for who shares. I'll share for you, you share for me. I started hanging out in the groups. There's Facebook groups. There may be groups in other platforms, but I built those relationships and I still have a lot of them today. There's always drama online, and I've had some moments of drama with people and they've sucked horrendously. It's always just craptastic when you have drama and bad things that happen in relationships. It will happen. But I have some really great friendships that have come out of this, people I would consider friends. An author friend that I met through one of these groups happens to live a couple miles away. When our pipes froze and we hadn't showered in like 5 or 6 days and we're disgusting, Bridget E. Baker, who's a fantastic author of a bunch of books, offered her house up, and we went and hung out there for a couple of hours, and our kids played with the horses and chickens and dogs, and we caught up about things, and they printed stuff on the 3D printer for us. These are the kinds of relationships that are real friendships now too, but also have been great for working together with other authors. And so I would highly recommend you're growing your email list, but you're also building relationships with these other authors. My attitude about it is to give as freely as you can, hoping but not expecting that in return. And there have been a few cases where I've had to stop giving, where it becomes a relationship where someone's just using me. And that does happen. But for the most part, it did come back to me. So, don't go bend over backward for people who just trample you, right? And you'll start to see who that is. And there are, again, like I said, some people I don't offer things as freely to, but I do try to give freely in those groups and be active and get to know people. Because that matters when you're doing cross-promotional things, when it comes to like multi-author series or box sets, and we all talk to each other. So if you aren't building a relationship, or if you don't, when I see authors asking for help sharing stuff and I'm like, I've never heard of this person. I don't know their books. I don't know them. I'm a little bit less likely to work with them. Although I always am looking for new books and authors. It does matter. And if you go in with some bad behavior, people are going to hear about it. So be kind and build good relationships with other authors. That does move the needle, because you've got these newsletter swaps and then some other opportunities that have come about for me because of the relationships that I build. And I get to shower sometimes at other people's houses. Another huge thing, and I'll talk about mistakes I did here, was to read and know the market. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I did not read any romance, and I did not read any clean romance before I wrote the first short story. It was not even really a novella that came out, 4 Days of Christmas. And I really missed the mark in some ways. Now, I do think I'm a strong writer just instinctively. Again, I have an MFA, seven of us got into the program, only 7. So I was one of 7 that got into this elite program. I know that I can write, but I didn't know the genre, and I made a lot of mistakes. And I even had to, rewrite just that short story because of some things I did that didn't really fit the clean genre. I also didn't know that romances had to have a happy ever after. So I had planned out a series because I knew series sell, but I didn't understand in romance that looks really different. So I hadn't read enough. I did not know the market enough. And when I was studying the market, thinking I was being all smart, I wasn't looking at the difference between indie publishers and traditionally published books. So I actually read a bunch of traditionally published books that were topping the clean romance charts and basing my books and my writing and my marketing on those. And that was a mistake. Can you use those as comps? I don't like to think about competition, but comparables. Yes, but you have to understand that traditionally published books, they have money behind them. So they can have covers that may not speak as immediately to the genre. They can make a lot of choices that we don't have to make as indies, because as indies, we're pretty lean. Even as you grow, I have a bigger ad budget now because I'm making more money. But when I was starting out, I needed people to know at a glance what kind of book I was writing. And I think that's hugely important still. So absolutely, you can use those as comps if you're an indie, the traditionally published books, but it is much better to look in the small sub niches, which there's a lot more sort of subgenres, and I'm using genres and niches kind of interchangeably here. But a lot of times now I'm not looking at the clean and wholesome category. That is a big category with all kinds of books. You've got Christian books, you've got traditional books, you've got indie books, you've got cowboy books, you've got firefighter books, you've got rom-com, you've got Regency, you've got historical, you've got all kinds. Fantasy is even in there some. So there's a lot of different things happening, and that's too messy of a big broad category. You need to kind of go down into the niches. So now I'm looking. Romantic comedy is what I'm looking at since I'm writing rom-coms. There are a couple other like men, women, and relationships, humor. Some of these smaller subcategories is really where I'm looking, and I'm looking mostly at the indie books. Now, I do also read traditional books, but it's important to read and know the market well. And I really think the reading is hugely important because it's going to help you understand the expectations that readers will have. And then when you're studying the market, you're going to understand the way that those authors are marketing their books. So that's another big thing. So just to recap, I've got don't waste your time on a lot of things. Grow your email list, build relationships with other authors, read and know the market. And speaking of market, we got a couple more. Speaking of the market, chasing trends. So there are times, well, let me say this. Chasing trends isn't a great choice for longevity. This is not something that is good to build a whole career on, but it can help boost you up. So when I talked about going from, that first March where I made $115, the next month I made $94. The next month I made $300 because I had a new release that month. I made $300. The next month $179. And then I hopped up in July to $1,700. Why? Because I published a billionaire book, and billionaire books were really hot. And going into that hot genre and then continuing to write in it, because I said, hey, the money's here. People aren't liking my beach series as much. I went up in the next month, I made almost $4,000. And the next month about the same. So I continued to go upwards, and then $6,000 a few months later as I continued to release books in this billionaire series, which is a hot trend. That was really helpful to get my name on the map, especially when starting out. Hot trends can help with that, especially if it's something you want to write in. However, when trends change, so that next year when I was still writing billionaire books, and I made some mistakes by walking away from the series that was doing well and writing other things I shouldn't have been writing. And anyway, there's a lot there that I did as a mistake, but billionaire books still are still selling now, but they were not as hot as they were. So as I finally in the next year in 2019 in spring was finishing out that series, my sales really were not as strong. They should have been stronger. I should have been on this upward trajectory, and they weren't. And part of that is because I lost my focus, but it was also because I was chasing a trend and the trend wasn't selling as well. So trends can help you. But if you're just going around picking and choosing different hot trends to follow and hopping on these bandwagons and doing what other people are doing, it's hurting you in several ways. And I'm going to get to more of where it's hurting you next in my very last thing. But, what I learned is that it can give you a foothold, but also when that trend changes, then you're stuck and you're holding the bag with these covers that may kind of date your books. And maybe like, oh yeah, that was so last year. And then it's like, well, do I have to recover all my books? Can I, put them in a different way that people are going to buy them? It's also, you're not really being true to yourself in some ways. And I wouldn't say that my billionaire books weren't true, although I did start writing them as a parody because I thought billionaire books were stupid. And then I fell in love with them, and then they sold well, so I kept going. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with any of the reasons that you're writing, whether it's for love or money. And for me, it's both. I did love those books, but I would not have said that that was my ideal sort of place. I love to find the intersection of what you love and what makes money. That's where I'm happiest. But chasing trends is going to leave you with a lot of different kinds of books. Readers aren't going to know who you are, and you're not going to know who you are, which leads me to my very last thing. And I think this is one of the big key things that I'm really starting to understand. Is that you should experiment, especially as you're starting out. And maybe that includes chasing some trends. But your goal should be to carve out your own space, to carve out your own identity as an author, to know what you write, the kinds of books, the kinds of feelings that they evoke, and who your readers are, that you're coming to a place where you're making that identity really clear. You're branding. Okay. You hear a lot about branding and people think of like colors and images and all that. Yeah, sure. But really, when it comes down to it, it's about who you are as an author and what you're serving up. what your readers can expect from you and then being consistent. So for me, I wrote a lot of kinds of books. Some were lightly Christian. I wrote some billionaire books. I have a beach series. I have a small town series. But I really, I liked them all, but I feel like until I started writing the romantic comedies, this is really the best fit for me. And, I wrote women's fiction as well, and I just hated it. It was it wasn't much more serious. There's still always, I feel like, humor in my books. And that was the thing. I feel like there was always humor in my books. This was a natural movement towards romantic comedy. And yes, that is trending well right now, but honestly, maybe not as well as people think. I see a lot of books coming out that are romantic comedy that are just doing kind of okay. I would say it's not necessarily a hot trend. I would say some books are doing well, and then a lot of books are trying to kind of climb on, but it's not working maybe as well as some of the hot trends. I think it's popular, I guess maybe is what I would say. But I had been planning to write it since 2019. I started publishing them in 2020. So I had actually been planning to write romantic comedies for over a year, and then hit the market, I think, at a very good time, especially in COVID. I think people are wanting things that are happy. But more so, I feel like this is the best intersection for me. Will I write other books? Yes. I just finished my last in series for the beach books, which was more serious. It's a contemporary romance, light Christian themes. There's some humor in it, but it's not a romantic comedy. And it was really hard for me to write because I feel like I'm so invested in where I am. And I feel like I've carved out my own space. Readers are starting to get to know really who I am. And I want to stay true to this. I may write other things, but I plan to stick here for a while. And I think that that's the thing is you want to find the space for you. You want to find your own identity as a writer. You want to find your own brand and then be consistent. So the experimentation can only get you so far in terms of what you're writing about and how you're writing and the styling and the way you're positioning your covers. You can try all these things. Pen names might help, although that's just adding a whole layer of work for you. But the goal should be, and this is really something that I've noticed, because again, the income that I have had, and I can look at the actual months, but I think for last month where I had that $26,000 month, I'm opening it up to actually look right here. I would say, and I'm going to eyeball the percentage, but I think it was probably about 80 to 90% of it was my romantic comedies, and there were 3. So, so out of the 26,000, let's see, 8 and 6, 14. So over 19,000 of that. Over 20,000 of that, including a novella that I wrote in that same series. Over 20,000 of that 26,000 was my romantic comedies. And it's not a bad month that my backlist made like $5,000-$6,000. That's not a bad month, but that was pretty steady for me. Adding in the romantic comedies took it to a new level. And I think it's both the writing, but also me finding my space and really plugging into that. And it has been difficult and strange to try to figure out what to do with my backlist because I debated doing a pen name and didn't. But now I have a lot of books that don't look like each other. And that can be an issue too, because readers don't know what to expect from you. So I feel like the experimentation is fantastic, but finding and carving out that space is hugely important, and really can help, because I think readers can sense that as well. I think readers can sense the love in the books. And I think that, I do love what I'm writing. And I think that that does carry through. There's joy in it. And it's so nice. There's also money. So these are kind of my big takeaways. Don't do things that waste time. Grow your email list. Build relationships with other authors. Read and know the market. You can, if you're chasing trends, just realize it's not a good choice for longevity. And you want to experiment, but with the goal of carving out your own space and staying consistent to that. We're always going to be growing. We're always going to be changing. You might want to try new things. But I think it's key that your readers know and understand who you are and what to expect from your books, and that matters. So this is kind of an overview of a lot of the things that I've learned, and there's more. So if you want to do the paid training, it's very affordable, and I always go deep and go very honest with them. So if you want to know more about the specifics, like my ad spend and all of those kinds of things, you can go to creativewriting.com/deep dive to watch live or get the replay if you're listening later, and I don't have the date carved out as I'm recording. If you want to find the show notes for this and find links to other helpful resources and see some visuals, you can go to creativewriting.com/2 202. And if you want to be on my weekly email list to get updates from the podcast and other resources, tools, and tips for authors, you can go to createifwriting.com/quickfix. This was a mouthful. I'm so excited to have this success to share. It's always changing, so I'm never stopping. I'm still building my empire. I haven't arrived. I'm still growing. I still worry about sales and rankings and all those things. It's been a joy, but still comes with worry and still comes with work. And I hope that it continues, and I'm building something that I hope is more permanent through the things that I've shared today. A big thank you to Jasmine Commerce of JasmineCommerceMusic.com for the music for the show. And hey, if you want to connect with other authors, you can join the free Facebook community, which I think is one of the best places on the internet to hang out. And that's at createifwriting.com/community, and that'll take you right to the Facebook group. This is the time of the show where I give you my final challenge, which is to go out and create content that you love and serve your people well.